All right. So just to look at, just like previous successes from watching your video, you actually did a good job with just like your before reading, working on IEP goals. So like I could tell that you were working on diagraphs. Like I could tell that you were taking in a moment data, and I could tell that I knew exactly what the scholars were working on, which are reading and spelling words with diagraphs. So great job doing that.
Thank you.
So great job with that. I think that it was like highly effective. It was to the point, like no time was wasted, and scholars were working the entire time. So today, we just want to delve more into just like the actual reading part of guided reading and reading part of when you're just doing assignments, like when you're just doing short, like paragraph reading.
Yeah.
So we are going to watch a video, and when you're watching the videos, I want you to think about what the scholars are doing, and what the teacher is doing. So I'm going to just pull that up for you. And so we're looking at scholar actions and teacher actions.
Okay.
Okay, today we're going to be reading the book Out to Play. But before we read, let's just talk a little bit about our strategies. What are we going to use if we come to a tricky word? What's one thing we could do? Evan?
Stretch it out.
Stretch out the sounds. Good. What's another thing we can do, Jordan?
Look at the pictures.
We can look at the pictures, and we can use both of those things to cross-check and see if we have the right word. Let's go ahead and give that some practice by reading Out to Play. What is that word? Did you get it, Evan? Are you right? Who's talking right now? Who is that? No, who said that in the story? I want to go to play, said.
So I want you to actually think about, stop.
What's up, you guys?
I didn't mean to do that. So I want you to think about number one, what are the scholars doing?
Silently reading with their fingers.
Yes, but were they silent?
They're whisper reading.
Yes. So they're whisper reading. And as they're whisper reading, what is the teacher doing?
She's asking kind of like quick individual questions to each of the scholars. Seemed like she spent more time with the boy at the end because I guess he was having more difficulties with the reading.
And so what do you think the impact is of having scholars whisper read instead of them just reading out loud and listening to each other?
Because that's actually a portion on their step test. They have the oral reading comprehension, but then the silent reading comprehension as well. And then when they're all, one scholar, when we're reading out loud, one scholar will read a sentence, and then the other scholar will read. But like if they're each reading it, whisper reading or silently reading, then they're reading all the sentences.
Yes. And then what is like the impact for you? So if you're having scholars whisper read, what does that allow you to do as a teacher?
It allows me to see like they're reading, right?
But what else can you hear whenever the scholars are reading, whisper reading?
Oh, I'm able to hear individual mistakes.
Yes. And when we hear individual mistakes, we're able to
go back and have the scholars correct them.
And even to take it a step further, if we can hear what scholars are struggling with, what else does that allow us to do when we see them the next time?
It may
Or
give us different, if they keep struggling with a certain digraph in a word or a certain vowel in a word, or prefixes or suffixes, it allows us to touch base on that maybe in the mini lesson the following day.
yeah, so just having the scholars whispery, just to, number one, you can hear individual mistakes so that you're able to correct individual mistakes, especially because they're struggling readers. So we don't want to we want them to read as much as they can, and we want to hear them read as much as we can. And you being able to listen to them and go to them when they need help. And what you will find, if you do it enough, you'll be able to kind of figure out, because scholars may be working on different things. So you would be able in lessons to point out that hey, here, I know this kid is going to struggle here, so I know to pay attention here. Or I know that this person is struggling here, I know to pay attention here. And even to take it a step further to comprehension, if you're having them whisper read and answer questions, you can note questions that you want to ask them individually, but it's still giving everybody the experience of reading the entire text.
Correct.
On their own.
That makes sense.
So, I want you to just watch your video, and I just want you to think about what is the gap.
Okay.
And I think I got it rewound to the right place.
The time right there. Second sentence and so on. The time is done. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Amir. Alright, so first we're going to read it out loud. Remember, Michael, if Amir is reading, what should you be doing with your finger? Yeah, and where should your finger be? Yeah, you should be following along with the paper. Very good. So Amir's going to read the first sentence, Michael's going to read the second sentence, and so on. So Amir's got his finger ready, his pencil's down flat, Michael's got his finger. Awesome. Amir, go ahead and start us off.
John is going to go
Discipline any of the scholars taken out of
for the
copy.
Cool. So Michael's finger's not following along with the whole time. Can we go back and try that again, please? I need you paying attention.
John is going to go skiing for
I got it as well.
Very good.
he is very excited and
Can you try it, please? Give it a try. And then Amir can help you.
because
Amir, can you help him with that word, please?
you come with this one. Besides,
Very good. The sides.
decide to try the big hill. He puts on his new skis and grabs his poles. Once John
So at the end of a sentence, what do we have at the end of a sentence?
a period.
Very good. So when you should be stopping when you come across the
Period.
very good, the period. So can we go back and read? So make sure we're stopping at the period.
He puts on his
So listen, I've never seen Michael so vocal.
No, he's very vocal.
Because he was not having that. Okay. So what was the gap?
They were taking turns reading sentences
And
instead of whisper reading the entire passage.
And so what would be just the impact of having the scholars read out loud or having the scholars whisper read instead of read out loud.
So they whisper read after that. Did you see that?
Yeah,
I
but
have them
so
read
like
out loud first, and then they whisper read to themselves.
so, but like we should just start like that at the
Start whisper
beginning.
reading?
Yes,
Okay.
because like at this point they've already read the text, so like kids can memorize text and memorize words. So you're actually not really actually getting just like data based on what they know without any prompts. Does that make sense? So like,
Say it again,
because
please.
like if you're reading, like if I read a story to you and
Okay.
you can follow along,
Yeah.
like you'll remember some of the story, you'll remember some of the words, as opposed to me just giving you something to code read.
Mm-hmm.
We give you something to code read. That's actually a better assessment of my reading ability rather than me reading something that I've read and reread.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we want to be taking real time data because just like maybe like Michael Michael obviously has actually like struggles chunking up words, and he's actually like you can tell he's kind of phased by bigger words, right? As Amir is not. But like Amir told Michael that word. So when you're listening to them whisper read, like he probably will remember the word now because we've told them that, especially because it wasn't a lot of words in the text that they didn't know.
Okay.
And so if you kind of have them help each other figure that out, it's actually not a very good assessment because you've already prompted them. That's like me that's literally like me assessing you on reading something you've already read. Like that's like us giving a kid, we want to do like what's the word I'm looking for? Like if we want to do a running record on a kid and we give them something they've read like multiple times already. That's not like a really true assessment of whether they can read the book or not. I think like having them read and reread the book is actually a good strategy, especially our kids for comprehension, but it's not a good assessment of reading ability. And just like what are their strengths and what skills have they generalized from lessons? Like what skills can they do on their own without prompting, as opposed to what can they do with prompting. So that's just like me trying to give like Breon is doing right now. He's working on his comprehension, so he's read and reread the book. But when I worked on just like could he sound out the words in a book that he doesn't know, when I took data on digraphs, it would have been worthless for me to have like do it at this point because he's read the book. And he knows the words. So we would want to do that based on something that's a code read, because that would tell us truly whether they are generalizing a skill or not.
Can I ask a question real quick? So yeah, that does make perfect sense. Michael only has reading comprehension minutes. He doesn't have basic reading. So I was like, when we read those short stories, like I always get Michael's reading comprehension data from that. And then Amir has, reading accuracy. He has that diagraph goal that Breon has. So I always collect data for that on Fridays. But even for like reading comprehension with Michael, you still suggest they both start off whisper reading?
And I mean, if you whisper read, like I would always suggest that whisper reading for Amir, because how do we know the words that if we, like I said, like if Michael gets to a word that Amir knows, how do we know that Amir doesn't know that digraph when Michael's already told him the word? How do we know that he hasn't generalized the skill?
Okay.
So we want to make sure that they're generalizing the skills when they're reading words with digraphs and can read those words in multiple texts, in multiple ways, not just independent words. Like we want to make sure that we can read them in books and then we can read them in short passages. So for example, like what I do with Breon typically, like if I'm taking data on just like his digraph, I actually print out, like I made a copy of that book and I actually go through the book and highlight the digraphs to ensure that he can actually decode those words without any prompts. So still, if you're going to take data on a basic reading goal, we want it to be a code read. And so like reread it, but reading the book and rereading it for comprehension is actually a good strategy for Michael.
Say that again, please.
Reading the book and rereading the book is actually a good strategy for Michael.
But silent read the whole time? Because they're both on DNA 6, so they have oral reading comprehension and silent reading. So that's why I was having them read a lot at first. But what would you suggest?
So if they are doing silent reading, and I actually model my lessons just like STEP, So I make Breon will read half of the book, like Breon read half of the book with me.
Yeah.
And then he had to do silent comprehension for the other half. And like right now, Breon is like independently answering comprehension questions without my prompting, like writing just like the step test. So I'm making him like practice the step expectations every day. Like Breon's struggle is like silent comprehension. So we do work on like the second part of the book. Like I do pay attention to, because I don't read the second half of the book with Breon. The expectation is that he reads it silently, because we have to practice those skills, those step skills with scholars. So if I would give them things to read, like either I would pick a longer text, and split it up, which is what I typically do, or some days but we didn't always do longer text. When Breon first started having to do silent comprehension, it was shorter reading passages. I just think like for him to be into it and better stories to keep him engaged, we just moved to longer stories. But that is just like whatever your preference as a teacher is. But you do want to have them practice reading their book silently and answering the questions if that's the step expectation. But one thing that I do is I do give him immediate feedback. So I don't I pay attention to what he is reading or what he's writing. So if I wasn't doing the O3, I actually still sit with him and I'll give him immediate feedback when he's answering the question. So I do stop him and ask him questions about what he wrote and where did he get it from, and practice finding it in the book while he's working. So those are just skills that you should practice. But even them reading it out loud them reading the text out loud is significantly different than them having to read a book to themselves, because it's a difference in your oral comprehension. So kids receptive language and receptive comprehension. Some kids will always do better if they can hear themselves read out loud.
Yeah, that's the case for Michael.
But then that silent comprehension is something that we have to practice. And so you want to give him ample opportunities to practice that skill. Which is why whisper reading is another good strategy, because you can whisper and he can whisper and hear himself and read it. And still answer the comprehension question. So if you're working on silent comprehension, I actually think that whisper reading is a better strategy than them listening to each other read anyway. Because they're still reading the book independently, which is the expectation when they're taking the step test.
Correct. Okay.
So, I actually am going to go back to your number one. Can you name your action step? What is your action step?
The two that I've kind of gathered so far: have scholars begin whisper reading, and then I liked your idea of highlighting words, because Amir does have that digraph goal. Highlighting words with the digraphs in the individual stories that they read before they actually read it. So just put more emphasis on it.
And then the other thing about whisper reading is that you can take notes on scholar errors, right? So to practice today, which is going to be a little different because there's really hard to practice whisper reading. But one, I want you to just kind of write out what your look fors are for scholars. So when you're listening to, if you were listening to, and you can act like it was as if it was Michael and Amir. When they're whisper reading, one, I want you to listen, what are you listening for? So, examples, you would want, you're listening for Amir to be able to read words with diagrams. For Michael, it may be you're looking for because if he's just working on I don't really want to give you all the answers, but if he's working on comprehension, he has to have automaticity of sight words and be able to fluently read. And so what would be your look for. So like I want you to write out what are your look fors when you're working with them. So when they're silent reading, what are you going to be paying attention to?
Write that?
Yeah.
Write in a way like I would explain to them?
I mean, you can write it like, so you should be like taking notes on your lesson plan or or in like a notebook. So like however you would set up your notes on your lesson plan, to take notes. So like, for example, I would, on my lesson plan, I would probably write my look fors in like a T-chart on my lesson plan. Like this is what this scholar should be doing, and then take notes under that. That's what I would do. But you can do it anyway. You would like to do it. So basically you just want to write out what your exact look fors are for each scholar. When you're listening to them read, what are you listening for?
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so if you're done, I'll share with you what I thought based on just like listening to them read. So like for Amir, I wrote my look fors with him would be decoding digraphs and making sure that he is, when he's struggling with a word, that he's actually going back and rereading the text fluently for his comprehension purposes. Okay. And like you can teach him that to just read and reread his sentences because he does struggle with decoding. And then for Michael, I wrote that I would be looking for him for fluent reading and automatic word identification because he is working on comprehension. And then with Michael, like I honestly, like while I would be listening for Amir's reading, I would like shoot in, like you heard the teacher just like ask the scholar like who said that, or words about comprehension for him, so that he's making sure that we are making sure that he has the ability to just like answer questions about all parts of the story. Because as we know, when like there's questions, like you can use the questions in the text, but there's always more questions that we can ask about the text. Definitely questions that lend themselves to their step test. And so basically what we're going to do, I'm going to have you listen to them read. Okay. And then just like practice taking notes on it. Okay. So we are going to go back into your video. And then you can take notes on what.
Thank you, Amir. All right, so first we're going to read it out loud. Remember, Michael, if Amir is reading, what should you be doing with your finger? Yeah, and where should your finger be? Yeah, you should be following along on the paper. Very good. So Amir's gonna read the first sentence, Michael's gonna read the second sentence, and so on. So Amir's got his finger ready, his pencil's down flat, Michael's got his finger. Awesome. Amir, go ahead and start us off.
John is going to go
Free on time. Time.
for the first
Cool. So Michael's finger's not following along with the whole time. Can we go back and try that again, please? I need you paying attention.
John is going to go skiing for
I got it as well.
Very good.
he is
Put yourself back in the book.
in
And Elijah's.
Can you try it, please? Give it a try. And then Amir can help you.
because
Amir, can you help him with that word, please?
you got this one.
Mhm.
Besides,
Very good. The sides.
decide to climb the big hill. He puts on his new skis and grabs his poles. Once John my turn.
At the end of a sentence, what do we have at the end of a sentence?
A period.
Very good. So when you should be stopping when you come across the
Period.
very good, the period. So can we go back and read? So make sure we're stopping at the period.
He puts on his new skis and grabs his poles.
So Amir saw the period, so he stopped. Michael's gonna start reading.
What?
John.
John get to the top of the hill. This period,
That's a comma. So yeah, keep reading.
he decided
Close. Look at that last letter.
decided
Thank you, Amir.
that he was not a good choice.
Michael stopped at the period. Very good, Michael.
John thinks that the bunny hill is a better choice. After a long day of skiing, John, I forgot a word. Because this one.
Can you help him with that word, please, Amir? You got it. Amir, go ahead and help him out, please.
Besides,
Decides.
he will get sick.
Mm-hmm.
Again tomorrow.
Yep. Who can raise your hand and tell me what skiing is? Amir. What's that? Very good. Yeah, so can you touch these skis in the picture, please?
Okay.
So Amir is touching the skis.
So, do you want to tell me what things you wrote, and then I can tell you what things?
Yeah, well, so for Michael, the text that he had trouble decoding was text besides D-sides, was B-sides and D-sides, and then the sentence that started off with the word once, he read that sentence very slowly, so I would have him go back and read that one, or read that one again.
So then, anything else for Michael?
I honestly, one of the things I wanted to get was like who, what, where, when, why, and how. Stuff about that in the text. And I honestly didn't even pick up on it. I didn't pick up on any of that. But I
So,
would.
if just knowing that those are the things he struggled with, what do you think like your next step may be for him?
Talk about the words he had trouble decoding. Well, those are words that you could have used chunky monkey with.
Yeah. So I would work on chunking up words with him.
Yeah.
That's exactly what my thought was. So one, like my two next steps for Michael were to one, teach him how to scoop.
Yeah. Okay.
So that like teach him how to scoop the sentences, because that's actually going to make him a more fluent reader. Just the way he reads, he's going to struggle with comprehension.
Yeah. No, I like that.
And then my other thing was actually to review, to practice chunky monkey with him.
Okay.
and like they don't have the same IEP goals, so you can honestly like while Amir practices his digraphs, you can just do a short practice for Chunky Monkey with Michael instead of having him do the digraphs too.
Okay,
Okay.
that works.
And then for Amir, what did you think?
The first sentence he struggled with, so I'd have him go back and reread that one, just so he could read it quicker. And then some of the digraphs he had was, TH in the, GR in grab, OLE was in polls, and then TH in think, and CH in choice. Those are some of the words I heard him say, so I would just highlight those.
And then make sure that like the next lesson, like we just review those digraphs.
Okay.
Like real quick.
Okay, cool.
And so like those are just like really quick next steps, like which is why like whisper reading is actually so much more effective.
Yeah.
Than this, because number one, you get very clear next steps for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use it as a way to just like guide your planning. But also just like all in all, like the goal is actually just to get them as much practice reading as we possibly can, as many words as we can.
Okay.
Because that's ultimately like that's what makes them a better reader. Like the more we read, the better we get.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that was all I had for you.
All right,
Do you have
thank you.
any questions